Matthew, you've been on hold for an hour and 39 minutes. Let's talk. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Paul, Seth. Yeah, Paul invited me back from my last call and said when he's on, he wanted to talk to me about how Peter and Paul did not write the letters attributed to them. So I wanted to honor that and listen to what he had to say.
So are you wanting me to just straight up make a case that they didn't? Because that takes whole hours. Or are you calling to defend that they did write them? Or are you wanting to hear
I just wanted to hear what you had.
Okay, then I'll try and keep it as brief as possible because I have videos. I was literally attending a whole conference, 10-hour conference this weekend with Bart Ehrman on a lot of these topics, where they were literally. So, for example, the letters of Paul, we talked about.
I didn't want to spoil it for myself. I didn't want to come in with a bias.
Yeah. Okay. So, very briefly, there's 13 letters of Paul. There's 13 letters in the New Testament that claim to be written by Paul. Hebrews is that weird one where at some point in history, some people thought it was, but it doesn't claim to be. So we'll leave that aside. Scholars basically put forth that probably 7 of those are the ones you get most agreement from almost all scholars in this topic, that there's the undisputed letters of Paul, and then the other 6 are likely not. The arguments for that fall into, and they're very lengthy. Again, entire volumes on each of these. There's stylistic differences, which is very convincing if you read Greek, for people like Seth and myself who do not read. I don't think Seth reads Greek. I don't. You have to take their word for it. Okay, the style is different, much in the way that if you picked up J.R.R. Tolkien and George R.R. Martin and the Harry Potter books, they're all fantasy books, but because we speak English, we definitely see, these were written by different people. So there's a whole category of arguments there. Some people are convinced, some are not. There's categories of arguments around literary dependence, where clearly the letters that we think are definitely written by Paul, they're all sort of free form and, written like a guy who might be in prison and doesn't have access to study things. Whereas the other 6 letters copy and paste from the initial letters the way a forger would do. So that's one line of argumentation. Then there's a whole line of argumentation where forged letters copy other forged letters. 2 Thessalonians is virtually the same letter as 1 Thessalonians, except for a chapter about the Antichrist in chapter 2. So anyway, these are all letters where people kind of say, you know what? 6 of these letters of Paul, they sure don't seem the same. And they also have anachronisms, right? Where they are using words like presbyters and other advanced topics that were the later 3rd century church had, 2nd, 3rd century church had, but Paul definitely dying before, they even took over Jerusalem, wouldn't have known about. So those are categories of arguments. And then when it comes to Peter, the categories of arguments kind of go into that in Acts 4, Peter is literally declared by the crowd to be an unschooled ordinary man. And the Greek word there, unschooled, literally means unlettered, as in he doesn't know how to write. So then you have to at least posit, he was using secretaries, something like that. Most scholars believe that the style of 1st and 2nd Peter are so different they can't be the same person. So at least one is forged. But they also can contain anachronisms and various things that are... I'm going to try and wrap this up super quick. That things Peter wouldn't have known about in the letters, and probably the most egregious of all, that he's quoting Paul. And all we know from Paul's authentic writings is that he and Peter did not get along. They didn't agree. Just everything that Paul ever wrote, he didn't like the guy. So that they'd be so copacetic in the letters of Peter doesn't sound very plausible at all. I don't know how quick that was. That is like the super fast speed run case against the authorship of those 2 things. Do you have any questions about that?
Not any questions. I just thought you had something like. I mean, I guess like you said, you don't have it all the time. I guess I was expecting like something more concrete or something that you had that.
Well, you can
I can look
go
into
to
what
my
you're talking
channel. I
about,
have
though.
hour-long video.
Yeah.
I have hour-long videos on each of these topics. If you want to go, like,
Yeah,
get
yeah.
the,
Like I said, I just didn't want to come spoiled with like a pre-answer
so
to that. I kind of wanted to see what you had.
Okay. Now I understand that a lot of Christians don't find those things compelling. Scholars absolutely do. My belief or disbelief in Christianity has nothing to do with which letters Paul wrote. Most of the letters that Paul probably didn't write are the ones where he's shitty to women. You know, like, so whatever. It'd be great for society if Christians would give it up, because they're some of the worst ones. And I'd also, the case against the resurrection doesn't. Peter could have wrote every single word of First and Second Peter. Doesn't matter to me. Doesn't matter to my case against Christianity. But these are just scholarly curiosities that I'm kind of a fan of. The more potent thing, the more pertinent thing is who wrote the Gospels, right? Because the Gospels are actually the story of Jesus. The epistles, people treat them as they want to treat them. A lot of pastors ignore them. A lot of pastors who want to do terrible things lean on them heavy. That's just an unfortunate side effect, not the root cause.
So you basically you come to this information like as a fan, not as somebody who has like a concrete stance on it. You're more just like, oh, this is interesting. And I thought maybe it was a little bit more something that you knew. Or
no, I've come to agree. I've come to agree with scholars that it's laughable for the Peter, the First and Second Peter, like, is just near universal that Peter did not write First and Second Peter. But I'm just saying there's nothing of weight. You could erase First and Second Peter from the Bible, and Christianity is largely unaffected. So whatever.
Even this is just my contention or response. I don't want to get too much into it, but even Second Peter 5-11 if you could erase that, and Christianity would be nothing or the same.
Well, why? Remind me what doctrine is in that section.
Basically, adding on to your faith, virtue, knowledge, brotherly kindness, godliness, charity.
Yeah,
if you do these things, if you don't
love your neighbor as yourself, would still exist, right? Like, no, but Jesus love, like, that's all love your neighbor as yourself stuff. That's just empathy.
Well, verse 9 says if you don't do these things, basically you're not making it to heaven.
Yeah, and Jesus said that too, right? That's what I'm saying. There's not First and Second Peter, as I remember them, and at one point I had them memorized, and I competed for them, and I won my Bible Skip tuition by quoting these verses. But you'll forgive me if they've, in the decades of past, they've faded. There's no weight, like there's no single point of anything in First and Second Peter that is a problem.
And forgive me, I may, because I'm a Christian and I obviously love this stuff. 1 Peter 4:1-2, nothing.
How is that a pillar upon which Christianity sits?
Well, it says that that Christ suffered for us, so likewise in the same mind we suffer in the flesh, so that we no longer sin, so that we live the rest of the life in the flesh, not to the lust of man, but to the will of God.
This is nice. This is nice poetry, but that's not doctrine, right? Like that's not unique doctrine. That's only 100% that passage.
Doctrine.
No, but it's not doctrine exclusive to that passage. That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
you could take it out.
Okay. So
you could lift it out, and Christianity completely survives, right? Like every doctrine exists, and that's what I'm saying. These are curiosities.
And you may be right, but when I present 1 Peter 4:1-2 to professing Christians, like people who say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian," it's like they almost like cringe at that verse. They don't want it in there because it destroys the whole evangelical Protestant idea of we're all sinners and no one's perfect and all this stuff. It literally obliterates that idea. I think 1 Peter 4:1-2 is very powerful.
Jesus said, "There's no one righteous, no, not one." I mean, so again, these are. I mean, it may well be color.
It's a verse. I can't remember. There was no one worthy.
Why do you call me good? It's like the rabbi. Like, what must I do to be good? Or what? It's roughly there.
Then he told them to be perfect. Give up your possessions and follow me, and then you'll have treasure in heaven. That's how you become perfect.
Yeah, Yeah, that's what he's. But I'm just saying the idea that no one is perfect is already existing. Look, now we're in the weeds about some of this stuff.
Okay.
No, not.
All right.
No, now we're no. Like, no,
I just thought you had something more
I
concrete.
just pulled it up out of Romans
Go ahead.
chapter 3, verse 10. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. I mean, the entire atonement story.
Yeah, that wasn't Jesus. That was Paul, but I hear you. Or maybe
Christ
not Paul, according to
himself.
Paul.
Hey, I want you to allow us to finish a sentence, Matthew. The entire atonement scenario is based on the fact that we are all sinners worthy of damnation or at least annihilation and have to be atoned for rescue to achieve heaven. The entire atonement on the cross scenario hinges on our unworthiness. So to tell me that Jesus never said it, Jesus was it. The entire Jesus story is an atonement story based on our unworthiness. And whether or not it says so in First Peter or in any of the Gospels is really beside the point.
Sorry, I meant that the idea that we can't be perfect is completely obliterated by First Peter 4:1 and 2. When the Christians say, "Oh, we're always going to sin, and we're always going to sin, no one's perfect," I'm saying First Peter 4:1 and 2 obliterates that idea.
So let me ask you this:
you and I are talking about two different things.
Yes.
You're talking about perfection. I'm talking about unworthiness.
I understand. That's why I made it clear. That's why I made a clarification. But Paul, you were going to say something?
All I was going to say was, you would agree, I think that Christianity hinges entirely on resurrection, right? If Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true no matter how flawed the New Testament is?
Yeah. If Jesus Christ didn't rise from the dead, then what's the point?
Right. So this is why when I am now in the big picture, right? I'm outside. I'm an outsider test. I don't care about the internal little minor squabbles that you're talking about there, about the nuances between the way Seth described it, which is how I understand it, and the way you described it. Don't care. I care about, did Jesus rise from the dead or not? Nothing in 1st and 2nd Peter at all it impacts whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. Similarly, in the 6 letters that are definitely forgeries, in my opinion, definitely forgeries, not written by Paul. None of those impact whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. So when I, as an outsider, am talking about, can you lift these books out or not, I'm still looking for that. Is Christianity true? And there are Christians who will admit that the New Testament has flaws. There's Christians that will die on a hill that there's not a single flaw in those books.
Yeah.
But that's not where Seth or I are at. So,
yeah, and you have to forgive me. Like I said, it may be that my love for these letters that we were given. Even Peter talks about being an eyewitness to this resurrection. So I would think that would be important.
I'm going to move
Peter,
on.
But
thanks for calling. Appreciate it very much. All right. I mean, he goes right back to Peter says, and the entire point was we don't know that Peter said. And then he says, well, I may be, did he use the word biased? Because I've fallen in love with these books. That's problematic. When we fall in love with ideas, and this gets us back to identity beliefs, they become branded or grafted onto who we are. And this is one of the reasons it's very challenging to talk to anyone who has an identity belief. And it can be Christianity, it can be Islam, it can be flat earth, all right? It can be an anti-vaxxer, which is maybe branded onto their notions of being free, or a contrarian, or they're not a sheeple, or any of these types of things. If you go and you say, well, I fell in love with this idea, then you aren't looking to be right. You are looking to be proven right. You're going to find evidence to make you sound or look right. And so for him to say, well, I've really fallen in love with these things, and then to continue to go back to the letter as if being written in that way makes it true is problematic. It's interesting that David Fitzgerald, historical research, he has just released a 3-part book series that I want your take on. I'm not going to, you probably haven't read the books, but his take is that not only does he think there was no Jesus, that he was a mythical character, and I don't know. I mean, it could have been a guy that the myth was based on, or it could have been, it could have been based on previous deities. I don't know, whatever. But he submits that Paul may not have even existed either. In volume 2, Who's Real and Who's Not in the Bible? Find out in God's Imaginary Friends, Judaism and Christianity, when we take a deep dive into the Bible's mix of myth, folklore, and political propaganda. And he gets into Abraham, Moses, Samson, David, Solomon, Jesus, John the Baptist, Paul, and others. Do you think Paul was a real guy? Paulogia?
So I only recently learned that Paul mythicism was a serious thing. So, but I absolutely do. And this is my pragmatic take. A single individual wrote 7 of those. Just, it seems from all external things that we can tell about common authorship, a single person wrote 7 of those letters that made it into the New Testament. I understand there's some scholars on the fringe that don't think that, but that's fine. Pragmatically, what are we going to call that? The person who signed those letters all said, I, Paul, write this letter with my own hand, right? So I'm pragmatically going to say, what sense does it make that there was a single author of those letters calling himself Paul who wasn't Paul? If someone wanted to do that, okay, I guess. But it just seems pragmatically there's a single, again, just like you and I might agree, hey, was there a Jewish man named Jesus who was crucified? Oh, and that's what, and that's the extent of what we can know about him? Maybe. Okay, sure. There, as far as I can tell, there was a person who wrote 7 letters, and I'm calling that person Paul. So that's
I love
that's where I'm at on that one.
Christ was resurrected story when the apologists say, well, of course he was resurrected. I've seen debates. I think Ehrman may have done a debate called "What Do You Believe in the Resurrection?" Somebody did. One of the scholars, counter apologists, whatever. Is it reasonable to believe in the resurrection? And I think one part of the story that always blows my mind is, when Jesus was crucified, the graves of the saints opened up, right? Mm-hmm. And then when he was resurrected, the saints crawled out of the graves and they paraded through the city of Jerusalem. And not one contemporary historian thought that was news. Like, nobody thought, holy shit, there's a whole ton of there's zombies shambling through. All the dead people that we haven't seen they're just walking through, and nobody thought that was worth putting in a history book. I find that fascinating.
Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Did you know we saw what you were doing when you watched it?
We saw all of it. All of it. All of it.
All of it. So you're going to want to pay us hush money over at patreon.com/calltheline, where you can buy our silence and watch our patron exclusive podcast.